Hi everyone, and thank you for coming out today. In spite of the rain, I think you're all brave to come out here and listen to this talk. I hope we won't waste your time. That's my highest ambition. So my name is Enrico Campidoglio, and I work at a consulting firm called Tretton 37. I guess you guys are mostly Swedish, but for those of you who aren't, Tretton is the Swedish spelling of the word, of the number 13, so 1337. Yeah, it's the spelling of the lead. Yeah, nerdy stuff. Anyway, in my daily job, I split my time in half, where half of my time I'm a consultant, a happy one, and the other half of my time I spent as a programmer. Yeah, that's me when I was young. Good times, good times. So this talk is about code reviews. So let me ask you guys and girls, are you guys doing code reviews by hand? Okay, so a few of you. And of those of you who are doing code reviews, how many of you are doing it as a standard practice, like on every code checking, on every code commit? Oh, that was more. That was more than before. Okay, okay, that actually makes me kind of happy. So for those of you who are not doing that, my question is, why not? Or rather, that was one slide too fast, by the way. Code reviews, or as I like to call them, do you want to merge? Let's talk about it first, okay? Not so fast. So, in this talk, I'm going to focus on two aspects of code reviews. One is the human aspect of it, and the other one is the machine aspect. Or for those of you who are agile practitioners, the human part is processes and interactions. Sorry, individuals and interactions, and the other one is processes and tools, or human stuff and computer stuff. Okay? Because code reviews are mostly made by humans, from humans to humans, so we're going to have to talk about the human aspects of that. Okay, so the question for this talk, which I hope I will answer, is why are we not doing code reviews as a standard practice? Because in the publishing industry, no written word ever sees the light of day unless it's being reviewed, right? Books, articles, they have to be reviewed by many people, both for correctness, but also for checking facts. So, as code is also written word, arguably, why are we not reviewing our code? Why are we just, committing and checking in your code happily every day, like there is no tomorrow? We should actually apply some of those strict review processes to our code too, because there are a few good things might come out of that. So, but to answer the question, I think that there are a few problems with code reviews. And as with most human-related problems, it's kind of hard to, really say what it is until it hits you in the face. So you might think that you have all a good process at your job. You think you're doing agile, you're doing user stories and sprints and retrospectives, but something is just not right. I know you guys are all looking at the picture, right? I might as well poke my nose right now. Nobody will notice that. So, well, let's look at one of the first problems that I see are a blocker for code reviews. And the first one is ego. So, programmers are a proud bunch of people who like to take pride in their work, and that's absolutely the right thing to do, but sometimes the ego just gets in the way when you're trying to receive feedback or give feedback to someone else, right? But let's think about one aspect of ego. Ego is inversely proportional to knowledge. Have you thought about that? The more knowledge one has, the lesser the ego, right? And the opposite is also true. The lesser the knowledge, the greater the ego. So that's something to think about when we are trying to control this ego thing that we all have. The other problem is identifying yourself with your code. which is also very common among programmers. Who hasn't done that, right? Like code is an extension of your soul. You have put a lot of work into it, and you're very proud of it, and then someone comes and review it and says, there are much better ways of doing that. And that, it's kind of hard to take. Because the code that we produce, we see that as an expression of the knowledge we have, or the amount of skill we have. And if someone is criticizing the code, it feels like they're criticizing us directly. And about that, I would like you to think about something. Has any one of you looked at the code you wrote for like 10 years ago? Yes. What do you think about that code? Were you proud of it? No, mostly not, right? Like with the knowledge you have now and the experience you have now, you look at the code you wrote 10 years ago, and if you had to review yourself, what kind of feedback will you give? I heard someone say you suck. Yeah. That's what most people think, right? But imagine, now remember how you were 10 years ago. Didn't you do the best you could at that time with the knowledge you had and the skills you had and what the state of the industry was in general? You did your best, right? So my point is that the code you produce is not an extension of you. It's just an expression of you at a certain point in time, okay? Or in a certain mental state, the state when you wrote the code. It might have been a bad day, even, okay? So let's separate the two things. They're not the same, code and the person itself. And then there is one other aspect, and that's related to peer pressure. There is this fear of making mistakes, okay? So, of course, nobody wants to be criticized by your peers for making some kind of mistake. You want to keep some kind of image outwards, right? And you don't want, we all make mistakes, of course. That's just part of normal life. But we prefer if they go unnoticed, generally. Or if we discover them first, so no one else does first. And code review is a place where you find mistakes. So we try to avoid that awkward situation where someone points out something that we did wrong by avoiding code reviews in general. So those things are all blockers, are all things that we all human beings do that are in the way for code reviews. And then there is another aspect, and that's culture, or rather, lack of culture in a team. Because in some teams, when you do a code review, things might get a little personal. You might speak in absolutes and say, this is wrong, this is not the way to do it, let me show you how you do it instead. And that rubs on the ego just wrong, that kind of culture. So let's be aware of that and let's kind of avoid that, right? Do not criticize the person, review the code, okay? Those are two separate things. And then there is a third aspect, and that is time. Code reviews take time away from the time you will spend by producing code. And we can't really escape from that fact, right? So there are, although some ways we can do, some techniques we can apply to make code reviews effective from a time perspective. But they do take time. So what is the problem? This is the graph of a programmer's average day, while on the y-axis is the productivity level. So as you see, it's pretty low in the morning. Then you get to the office and you start working, and those dips, you see those red dots? Those are points in time when someone comes and taps you on your shoulder and say, hey, did you get my email? Did you hear the phone calling when I called you? So those are the times when concentration drops, focus drops, you lose context, you lose track of what you were doing, and you have to start all over again. And one of such questions could be, hey, could you review my code? like right now, drop what you're doing and review my code. And just, even if you say, no, I don't have time, you already got interrupted. And as you can see, of course, productivity goes way high during the night when everybody's asleep. So that's the best programmer time, right? So from about midnight to 3 in the morning, that's when all good programs get written. Certainly a few programs have been written at that time. I can name a few. So, will you recognize this scenario, right? So we are working on some code, and you are building this context in your head, you know, trying to understand how that works. And you're trying to, you know, it's like circus, right? You're like on the line without safety net, trying to keep everything in your head, and building a lot of context, and time passes, and you're trying to figure it out, and you might think you might just have it now. You know how that code works. I can actually start changing it now, because I know all the side effects, and then this happens. Did you get my email? And then you're back on square one. So that's a problem with code reviews. So to summarize, we have 3 areas of trouble. One is ego, the other one is culture, and then there is time. Okay? Let's see what we can do about that. But first, let's talk about why should we even bother? Why should we even do code reviews? Why? So there are a few advantages to it, okay? The first is, you might be wondering, why am I going to say? How can you possibly follow up to that picture? That is code quality, and the feel you get when code quality goes up. By the way, did you raise your hand if you recognize who that is? Okay, there are fewer hands than I usually get. So for those of you who do not know who that is, that's He-Man, which is a cartoon from the 80s. So I'm guessing you guys are either younger or older. Those who don't recognize. Or maybe you didn't watch TV. You were out playing in the fresh air, which would have been a much better use of time. So code quality goes up. If you look at it too much, you might get flickering in your eyes. The other advantage of having code reviews is finding bugs before everyone else does, especially your customers. So one goal of code reviews is actually to find defects, not just to improve the quality of the code. Because of course, more pairs of eyes will find more defects than just one pair. And then there is this knowledge sharing idea. If you have code reviews in a group, the programmers who know more about either the technology, the language, or the domain will of course discuss those things and bring up stuff that others might not know, and that will create a discussion. And in that discussion, knowledge will be shared. And possibly differences of opinions might also arise. But that's all good, because the more you talk in a team, the more synergy you create in that team. You work out issues, you work out differences of opinions, you create conventions. That all happens in the code review. And then you end up with a team that works like that, ideally, right? They are all in sync. Everybody knows where everybody else's point of view is, and you have this synergy thing going on. That's also a nice side effect of having code reviews in place as a standard practice. Okay, so we have seen there are some problems that are human-related problems and time-related problems. If we now all agree that code reviews are a good thing to have, yes, no? Is someone disagreeing? That's okay, we can discuss that. No? So we all agree that code reviews are a good thing to have. Let's see how we can turn it around, how we can take those bad aspects, those blockers, and turn them into our advantage. Okay? First, there is something called the Big Brother effect. Oops, that was one too much. The Big Brother effect. So by having code reviews in place, you create a kind of a peer pressure, because people will feel absurd. Imagine that. You know that code reviews will happen. Your code will be reviewed at some point. Wouldn't you just try a little harder to pass the code review without as few notes as possible? Of course you would. So that's called the big brother effect. It doesn't involve having sex on TV at all, even if it might in some teams. But generally, that's a nice side effect. Plays a little bit on the ego, and it plays on the peer pressure. And by the same token, you have this thing called ambition. Oops, I'm trigger happy today. Oh, wrong. Ambition. Of course, when you do a code review, you really want to shine, okay? You don't want to sit there in a code review and everybody goes like, oh, what's that? Is that me? Does that missing a semicolon? Something like that, okay? And that also increases the quality of the code as a side effect. And then you have, I'll let you guys watch that. You have that thing called constructive feedback. By having code review as an exercise in your organization, you will kind of learn how to give constructive feedback. You might not start from that point. You might start with the personal attack situation, but if you just keep at it and keep having code reviews, at some point, people will learn to be constructive in their feedback, which is also a good thing to have in your skill set, actually. But it won't happen by itself. You have to practice at it. You have to sit through these code review sessions, okay? Because in the end, we are actually all in the same boat. And having this kind of culture implies having trust in that people want to do their best, which is kind of the other side of the scale. If you look at older project management systems, like waterfall, for example, and micromanagement, which are built on the assumption that people are lazy. They don't want to do their job. So you need to micromanage them. You need to check every hour of their day how it's spent. You need to check progress on a daily basis because you just don't trust. You don't have any trust on the team. That's an old way of thinking, one that comes from another industrialization process, of course. It comes straight from the industry time, from manufacturing. While in the agile way of thinking, we actually put trust in the team. We trust that the team wants to do their best. And every team member wants to cooperate with the others to have the project succeed. Okay. So, let's turn the page now and look at this time aspect. We have said that code reviews take time. But there are some ways, some techniques you can use to make them more effective. Now, there are 3 kinds of code reviews. Well, actually, there are 6, but the other 3 are very boring. So let's boil it down to 3, because 3 is a nice number, right? So the first one is called the formal code review. And the formal code review is the one where you go into Outlook, or even Lotus Notes. Is anyone using Lotus Notes? That's okay. I use it. All right. You go into your calendar management system, whatever it is, and you book a room. You book a projector, and sometimes you even book sandwiches. Then you invite all the people who are supposed to be in that code review. The experts in the domain, the experts in the functionality, the old guys with beards who wrote the old system. And then you get into the room and they go, okay. Show us your code. And that's a scary situation to be in. Also, as you can see, those guys are usually pretty serious. They even have a typewriter, which means they really know their shit, right? You don't want to be in that situation. It's not productive. It takes a lot of time away from everyone who has to sit there. But that's one way of doing code reviews. It's time-consuming, it's scary, but it will find the most number of defects too. So that's the most formal one. On the other side of the scale, you have the one that's called over-the-shoulder code review. And the over-the-shoulder code review, it's the one where someone goes, okay, gather around my computer now and I'll show you my code, because I need a code review. And people just drop what they do, they gather around the computer, and the guy who wrote the code or the girl who wrote the code, they go, okay, so this is what I did. I did this, I did this, I did, and they switch the files, and then they scroll up and down, they skip parts, they say, don't look at this, it doesn't really matter, Yeah? And everybody goes like, okay, looks good to me. Yes. Yeah, sure, check it in. And they go back to what they were doing. Because first they weren't listening in the first place, and in the second, for a second, the person walking them through the code was going too fast. They don't have time to think by themselves. They don't have time to resonate about the code. So all they can do is either say you're wrong, or just nod and say, well, yeah, whatever. Check it in. So that's very agile from the point of view that it doesn't take too much time. It's very spontaneous, you don't have to book anything. And it's quick to do. But also it won't find as many defects. Why? Because a dialogue could be like, as you have the others look at your code, you might find something, but remember the ego, the peer pressure, the afraid of making mistakes, prevents you from pointing that out in that forum. Unless someone, of course, is awake. So that's the second kind of code review. I don't know about you, but I usually don't wear a tie at work. And if I did, everybody will ask me if I'm going to get married later today. So those are the two extremes, right? The very formal code review and the very informal code review. So somewhere there must be a middle ground, right? We all know that. And that's called, well, actually it doesn't have a name. Someone call it the offline code review, I've heard. I call it the async code review. And then all the C# programmers are going like, hey, async, what do you mean? Async is a keyword in C# 5. How do you call a code review that? Don't mess with my keywords. And I go, yes, I know, but I mean async because it happens at a different time and place than when the code was written in the first place. And that's, if you're doing some open source development, like on GitHub, for example, that's the kind of code review you get. You do all your changes, and then you publish them on some kind of website or a common platform, and then you go, okay, go nuts. I'm off to the beach. You guys do the review when you have time, and at your own pace, you can use as much time or as little time as you want to go through the code. You can resonate about it, and then give me the feedback. Okay. So that's the async code review. However, I found it really hard to picture how it is in the real world, how that happens, right? So instead of having a picture of async, I put up a picture of nsync. just to give you an idea. Okay? So that's, in my opinion, the code review that, the code review that's most preferable of the three, if you're going to choose, if you can choose. So, to put it all in perspective, let's imagine that I did some scientific research and I measured how much time it requires to make a code review and how a number, so on the x-axis is the time invested and on the y-axis is the number of defects you find. And then on the upper right, where actually it's your right, my left. On your right, you have the formal code review. It's the most time expensive, finds the most defects. Of course, conveniently, on the other side is the over-the-shoulder code review, but that's kind of true. Very quick, but also very not efficient at all. And in the middle, you have this async or nsync, it depends on your musical taste. And that's where you want to be. That's the sweet spot of code reviews. Okay. Now, finally, now we are done talking about the human-related stuff, because it's funny, most programmers started working with computers because they wanted to avoid dealing with people. They just wanted to deal with computers. So I'm going to be a programmer. And then, 5 years later, you find out that programming is all about dealing with people. And you're like, oh, man, wrong age. Maybe it was like that back in the 80s. So, now we're done talking with human stuff, let's talk about the tools. So, it's now officially tool time, the best time. The time is to talk about tools. Now, to do this async code review, there are a few possibilities of code. You need some kind of tool to mediate between the parties, right? You need somewhere to publish your code, and this, on the same place, other can give you feedback, and you can have this discussion back and forth, and it's usually a web application. Now, GitHub is one such example, but not everyone can have their code on GitHub, not even enterprise, like when it's a private repo. Sometimes you need just a system that only exists on your internet, inside your firewall. So, but there are some free open source products you can use. Now, when I gave this presentation for the first time, this product I'm going to show you didn't exist while it wasn't released, but now it is, and I think it's much better than the one I showed back then. Go figure. So, I'm going to start by showing you this new one, and then I'm going to talk about the other one. So this one is called AppSource, and it's made by JetBrains, that is the same company that makes ReSharper and IDEA, if there are any Java programmers. This is a web-based code review tool, which also gives you some nice navigation features, basically. Right now, it's on early access program, so it's not released yet. It's you can say a public beta. I'm not sure about the details of the licensing afterwards, but this is something you basically install on a server. You point it at your code repo, whether it be Mercurial, Git, Subversion, and Perforce. Okay. So no TFS. Anyone using TFS? That's okay? Yes. Okay, a few. But I know TFS in the latest version actually has some tools for code reviews. So you're all covered. This one is something that lives on the side. It doesn't have to own your repo. You can just point at it and it will just watch it for new commits. And that's the one we're going to focus on first. The other one is called Gerrit. Has anyone heard of Gerrit? A few. Even using it, maybe? Cool. That's really cool. So Gerrit is an open source project that's it was created as a fork of another project that's called Mondrian or Mandrian. Can anyone help me out? Mondrian? Mondrian? I think it's Mondrian, which was a tool developed internally by Google to do their own code reviews. The problem with that was, first, it was closed source. Of course, Google wouldn't release it. It was just an internal tool. And it was tied to Perforce, because Google was using Perforce as their source control system. So someone, not sure who that was, sorry, can't really give credit, forked it, and instead of tying it to Perforce, it tied it to Git, because that's what they were using, and call it Gerrit. Now, this is a very rich code review tool. It has a lot of possibilities, and it supports many kinds of workflows, and you could say it's a lot stricter than the others. You can have many gates you can put in place that your code has to go through before it's been considered good for merge. So it's very rich, but it's also the UI really sucks, so I'm going to show you that too. Now, I'm actually done with the presentation part. Anyway, this is the flow we went through. We asked for a review. We gathered the feedback. We did some iteration on the feedback, and we basically closed. And that's what every code review goes through. This is those four phases. Okay. Let me leave you with just 3 concrete tips to think about when you do code reviews. First one, someone noticed in the break, make small changes at a time, because it will be much easier to review a small change than a huge change. Now, sometimes, like I've seen seriously a commit. It was many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. This commit contained, I'm not kidding you, 186 files. Yes. You know what the comment was on that commit? Many changes. You don't want to review that. You don't want to review that. So small commit, but also focused commit. One commit is one logical change and nothing more. It says so in the message. The reviewer knows what's that about, what kind of change that is, and the diffs only have to do with that change and nothing more. No new feature plus refactoring plus bug fix. That would be 3 separate commits. Second one is having a checklist. Now, of course, there are some things you notice first, like typos, braces, semicolons, comments. But sometimes it's nice to have a checklist that you know that's specific, for example, for your framework of your language. Like for C#, for example, or for Java, you could say check for argument null exceptions or argument exceptions. Make sure the braces are in the right place. Check for, if it's Java, check that the method actually is declaring the kinds of exception that it's throwing, like you have it in the Java signature. Stuff like that. Of course, if your language is JavaScript, then the list will be empty. You can do whatever you want. And last but not least, when you're doing the code review, I know nobody who has a sane mind will review a piece of code for more than an hour, but you never know. So keep the review time under 1 hour. And that's especially true for meetings. If you have a meeting, a code review meeting, once you hit the hour, just dismiss everyone. Because if you just keep staring at that code, you won't see anything else. And if you're in the middle of discussion, if you haven't resolved it in the first 10 minutes, chances are you will never resolve that discussion. At least not at that point in time. So let's just leave it. So short commits, short review times, and have a checklist to follow through. Okay? With that, I will say thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, we can absolutely have a Q&A answer. Thanks.